Okay, well, I apologize for our delay. Hopefully our internet will hold out. As I was saying, this is our Curator's Corner program, and this is part of a series that we're doing that was started when the building was closed, but we are reopened. But we continue to offer these online programs because we know that people have continuing concerns about accessing museums and public spaces. Before I start my talk today, as always, I want to encourage you, if you have questions about anything that I touch on, to please use the Q&A window on Zoom, and I will try and respond either during my talk or at the end of the program. Let me just open one more thing on my screen here so I can understand what's happening. And again, we will hope for continued internet coverage. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about a child's accordion that stands in our children's gallery. This is one of our most well-known items, as it was an instrument that helped to save the life of Alex Rosner, who was one of the youngest names on Oskar Schindler's famous list. Before I talk more about this instrument or Alex Rosner's amazing story, let me say a word of thanks to Alex Rosner, both for donating the instrument to our collection, but also for taking the time to talk with me about his family's history. It was really a pleasure and an honor to spend some time listening to him and talking to him. Here you can see a full view of the instrument as it's displayed in our museum. And here I have a picture of Alex at the age of 11 holding the accordion that we have on display. But by the time this photograph was taken, Alex had already lived through a lifetime of horror. Alex Rosner was born in 1935 in Krakow, a city in southern Poland. At the time, Krakow was home to about 56 or 60,000 Jews who made up almost a quarter of the total city population. Alex's family was a family of musicians. His grandfather was a famous violinist whose orchestra performed in Krakow and across Poland. Here's a photograph showing the family orchestra with Alex's grandfather in the front with the violin. His grandfather also taught his 9 children to play various instruments. Alex's father, Henry, the oldest of the 9, played the violin, initially joining with his father in the father's orchestra, like you can see here, and then gaining fame as an individual player or performing with his younger brother Leo, who played the accordion. And Alex, like his father and the other family members, also started to play at a young age, learning the accordion like his uncle. But life for Alex and the Rosner family changed in September of 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. 5 days after the start of the war, the Nazis took control of Krakow, a city that the Nazis would establish as the capital of the annexed territory that they referred to as the general government. A month later, the Jews of Krakow had to report for forced labor assignments. And in December, a law was passed where all Jews had to start wearing a Jewish star to identify themselves. Not long after that, Jews had to register their property and all their valuables. And beginning in the fall of 1940, Jewish residents were moved into a newly created ghetto, which was enclosed in March of 1941. This map shows you the outline of the ghetto. Here is the main gate to the ghetto through these elaborate ghetto walls that were put up that enclosed this region and limited entrance and access. Jews had a long history of living in Krakow dating back at least to 900, so for more than 1,000 years by 1939. And there had been good periods during that time, and there also had been problematic periods. Beginning in the 1400s, many of the Jews in Krakow had moved into one neighborhood, Kazimierz. And in some ways, it seems strange if the Nazis wanted to enclose the Jews in Krakow into a particular area, it would have been easy to designate Kazimierz as the ghetto. But the Nazis had no interest in letting the Jews stay in their homes. And instead, the Nazis established the ghetto across the Vistula River, closer to several factories where the Jews would be used as slave laborers. One of those factories where enameled cookware and plates were made was purchased from its Jewish owners under a forced sale by the German industrialist and Nazi party member Oskar Schindler. Here's another more detailed view that shows you where his factory was in Krakow. Schindler, at least initially, seemed largely motivated by the opportunity to make money. He used his connections with the Nazi party to secure military contracts for his enamelware, and he secured Jewish workers who were by far the cheapest type of labor to draw on. At some point, however, Schindler had a change of heart and stopped seeing his business as simply a source for income. And it's not exactly clear when that change took place. He later claimed that after seeing a particularly brutal and violent killing of Jews by Uman Get, the sadistic commandant of the Plaszow concentration camp on the edge of Krakow, Schindler decided he could no longer support that Nazi system. He also may have come to know some of his Jewish workers and felt he could not treat them as slaves. It just wasn't in him. Or from a more pessimistic view, perhaps at some point he realized the Nazis were going to lose the war and so started to think about how that would affect him. For whatever reason, Schindler started to protect his workers, claiming them as essential to the war effort to prevent them from being deported. And among the protected workers was Alex Rosner's family. Schindler had first met or heard Alex Rosner's father play the violin at a dinner party like this one held by Uman Get, who had saved Henry Rosner and his brother Leo so they could be his own personal musicians. Schindler chose to add Leo and Henry, along with Henry's wife Marianne and his son Alex, and other families to Schindler's workforce. They became part of Schindler's list of protected Jews, made famous, of course, in the movie by Steven Spielberg. Henry's musical talents had saved him and his family. Henry's father described another event at one of these dinner parties that drove home the power of music to him. Henry and his brother Leo were performing one evening for Uman Get when a drunk SS officer who was depressed because of some kind of failed love affair asked Henry and his brother Leo to play a particular song, a melancholy Hungarian tune called Gloomy Sunday, which was associated with suicides. In the lyrics for the song, there's a man who considers suicide because of his love in a relationship. Anyway, the SS officer kept asking Henry and Leo to replay the song. And eventually, after a few repetitions, Henry apparently leaned over to his brother and said, you know, maybe if we keep playing it enough, it'll drive this SS officer to commit suicide. And so that's what they did. They kept playing and playing. Some 30 times they played this one song. And at some point, the SS officer went out on the balcony and shot himself. So exactly what they had kind of unwittingly thought would happen, or they didn't really suspect would happen, but hoped would happen, did. So not only had music saved Henry and his family, but it actually served to kill a member of the SS. Sadly for Henry and the other Jews, the rest of the SS and the Nazis continued their murderous rule. Finally, in 1944, as the Nazis retreated in front of the Red Army, the SS began to close down factories like Schindler's in Krakow. Schindler got approval to move his factory west to Brunlitz in the Sudetenland, saving his workers from being sent to killing centers near Krakow. In advance of the move to the new factory, however, Alex and his father Henry were summoned by the SS, along with 10 other father-son pairs who were working for Schindler. And they were all told that the children, like Alex, who was only 8 years old, were too young to work in the factory. And thus the children and their fathers were being deported to Auschwitz. Henry managed to get a Nazi guard to get a note to his wife, but with little further notice, Alex and his father were placed in a train and sent to the infamous killing center that was located only 40 miles west of Krakow. Henry's reputation, however, continued to help and saved him and Alex once again. When they arrived at Auschwitz, one of the guards recognized Henry as a great violinist and pulled him out of the line that was heading to the gas chamber. Henry pulled Alex along with him, and a guard asked if Alex, the boy, could play. When Henry said he played the accordion, a guard eventually came back with this red child's accordion. It had likely been brought to Auschwitz by a different family who had been murdered and their possessions stolen and placed in storage in the Canada warehouses in Auschwitz. For Alex, however, it was a lifeline. He showed he could play and was seen as a cute addition to his father. Alex, however, has told me, and I've heard him say it before, that he emphasizes that it wasn't really his own playing skill, or that wasn't the reason that he was saved. He was saved by his father. His father told the Nazis the only way he would play is if his son was saved. So it was his father's musical abilities rather than his own that kept Alex alive. At Auschwitz, like in Plaszow, Henry and sometimes Alex were called on to perform for the commandant or for senior guards. They weren't part of the larger orchestra, camp orchestra, but were the kind of private plaything of the Nazi elite. Still, it kept them alive. Alex and Henry did not stay in Auschwitz all that long, as they were then sent on to Gross Rosen, a different camp, and then eventually to Dachau. Along the way, the red accordion and Henry's violin were confiscated. Henry's father, however, had the quick wits to tell the Nazi guards who took their instruments that they were the property of Oskar Schindler. And amazingly, Schindler eventually got both instruments back. But Schindler didn't know what had happened to Henry and Alex. At Dachau, Alex almost died from typhus, but was saved by the help of a worker in the infirmary who took him under his own protection. One of the other events that just was the luck that saved Alex. And on April 29th, 1945, Alex and his father were liberated from Dachau by the US military. They tried to locate the rest of their family and eventually reconnected with Alex's mother, Marianne, who Schindler had managed to save and who had the violin and accordion that Schindler had received. Marianne had been told that her husband and son had been killed, but then saw their names listed on a bulletin issued by the UN's Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, saying that they were in Munich. The family reunited and stayed in Munich for about a year, but were unsure of where they were going to go after that. Henry then made contact with one of his younger brothers, George, who he had not heard from since 1939. George had not been in Krakow when the Nazis invaded. He'd been in New York as part of a jazz orchestra that was performing at the 1939 World's Fair. He might have returned to be with his family, but George learned in New York that his wife and daughter had been murdered in the first days of the war. With nothing to go back to, George stayed in New York and later enlisted in the US Army. After the war, with George serving as a sponsor, Henry, Marianne, and Alex got approved to come to America. On May 13th, 1946, they sailed out of Bremen on an old merchant marine cargo ship called the SS Marine Perch, arriving in New York 10 days later. This is a photo not of his group, not of Alex and his family. It's actually, the only photo I could find was of a ship, that ship sailing a month later. But you get the sense this was a cargo ship, a military cargo ship that had been converted in some ways for passenger travel to get the refugees across the Atlantic. Here is the actual ship's manifest from May of 1946, showing Alex and his father, who's listed as Herman, and his mother, who is listed as Maria. You might note that Alex here is listed as 11 years old at the end of the war here in 1946. And that is when the photo was taken of him holding the accordion, surrounded by the family luggage when they had just gotten off the ship here in New York. Alex told me that actually the luggage has, you can see the material covers on them that his mother had made to protect the luggage as they brought it over. Another photo, sorry, it's a little blurry, captures the family as they departed the ship, putting the horrors of the war behind them. A lovely photo. Alex's family initially moved in with George in their home in Flushing, but later moved to Astoria and then bought a house in Middle Village. Henry and George used their musical talents again in the United States, performing at restaurants and for private events. They had a chemistry, according to Alex, that was noticeable to anybody who would hear it, and an amazingly diverse repertoire that they could draw from. Talented musicians. Alex told me that they could be on opposite sides of a room and one would start playing, and within just a note or two, the other would join in as if they had planned it. They just were that connected. Oskar Schindler also remained part of their life, visiting them many times over the years in Long Island. Henry finally retired from his violin playing career in his 80s and donated his violin, the violin that had saved his life, to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And that's what you see here. Alex's mother, despite the fact that music had saved their family's life, told Alex he should choose a different profession. She told him music was an ungrateful profession, Alex told me. And according to him, she said that he would only become a musician over her dead body. Alex, like a good son, followed his mother's guidance. He did not become a musician. He went on to study engineering at RPI, served in the Navy, and started an audio engineering firm where he pioneered the first stereo systems in clubs and reshaped the way music was shared in large spaces in New York. This is a picture of you can see where Oskar Schindler is back in his life. He tried, he said, to forget the years during World War II. He told me that his parents would obviously gather with friends, many of whom were survivors as well, and they would refer back to those years during the Holocaust, but Alex would try to leave the room. He didn't want to be part of that. He didn't want to remember it. However, notably, he held on to the red accordion, keeping it stored in a plastic bag and in his basement. In 2015, after having a conversation with HMTC's former chairman, Steve Markowitz, he donated it to our museum, where it stands as a reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust, but also a reminder about the power of music that saved this one family. It's really an amazing story, and I'm going to stop there. If you have questions, of course, I'd be happy to answer them. Before you get to that, before I get to that, let me put in a plug for some of our other upcoming programs. As I said at the opening, our museum is open, but we encourage you to call us in advance and schedule your visit so we can make sure that there's space available in the galleries. In terms of programs, next Wednesday we have at noon a virtual tour of our gallery. This is going to be done by me and my colleague Helen Turner, and we are going to focus on connections between our museum and Black History Month. On February 21st, we'll be holding our next Sunday with Survivors program, in this case with Holocaust survivor Stephen Berger. I should add, this is a rescheduled date after our program was canceled from last weekend because of the snow. And one more program to mention, on Tuesday, February 23rd at 6:30 p.m., we're going to have a book discussion with author Michal Deckel about her acclaimed book, Tehran Children, A Holocaust Refugee Odyssey. You can find more details about these programs and how to register on our website at www.hmtcli under the Events tab. And you can also always click on the Give Now button that's on our homepage to help support virtual programs like this. Okay, let me look and see if you've got some questions. I see, was Alex able to remember any music by some musicians who died in the concentration camps? You know, I did not hear from him anything about that music. I know that there have been several articles recently that I've seen about people who are collecting the music that was made and performed and written in some of the concentration camps. And I believe there's a guy in Italy who's collected a lot of it and is trying to perform some of it. But I don't know if Alex in particular remembers that. As I said, he described how he himself had tried to forget those years for many years. I I see another question here. Do you know if there were other talents and abilities that peoples could have that could help them survive the Holocaust? Yeah, I mean, it's the question of how, in addition to music, how else could you have survived the Holocaust? There were obviously particular skills. I know of a famous book by a doctor who survived by providing, by becoming a doctor in Auschwitz, in Birkenau. And there were a number of musicians who survived. If there were things that the Nazis thought were helpful or useful, they might have kept those Jews around for a little bit longer, although nothing could for sure ensure protecting the Jews, because at some point the Nazis really did try to kill all the Jews. Did all of Henry's 8 musical siblings perish? I can't remember the number. They didn't all perish. There was George in New York. Leo, his younger brother, had made it to Australia, survived. Schindler kept a number of I think his sister as well. I want to say that there were 4 or 5 of the siblings that survived in addition to Henry. I'm not exactly sure of the total number. And really, it's a testament to both the musical family, and to Oskar Schindler. He kept them alive. Another question about, does Alex still play the accordion for enjoyment? I asked him about that. He said he recently bought a new accordion, and he does play it every now and then, but he also emphasized to me that he doesn't have the musical skills that his father or some of his siblings or some of his uncles and aunts had. I'm not sure if that's humility or if that's the case, but he does still play apparently every now and then, and just bought himself a new accordion. Another question, did Schindler try and get Alex and his father and the others out of Auschwitz? Yeah, I believe Schindler did try to do what he could, but he was unable to save them, partially because I think things moved so quickly. They were taken there and quickly registered and put into the camp, and then they were not able to come out. And it was also right as the time as Schindler was moving his new factory, when there was a kind of pressure to get out. Somebody is mentioning there's a documentary about the Italian musician collecting the Holocaust music and bringing it back. Yeah, I have seen a lot of stories about that. And somebody's mentioning Gloomy Sunday is an exceptional movie. Apparently we have explored showing it here. I'm not familiar with it. Sounds a little depressing given the title, but perhaps it captures some of the power of music, among other things. Okay, well, thanks very much for tuning in. I hope to see you at some of our other programs soon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.